watching the sky like he'd been waiting for something. When he asked to sit in the reserved section, they told him those seats were for veterans. He just nodded and walked away. 2 hours later, the F-22 Raptor team would break formation mid-flight without warning, without approval, just to pass over that exact spot and give him a salute no one would forget. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today, and if you believe moments like this deserve to be remembered, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. The air show at Fairford had drawn thousands, families, veterans, recruits, officials, all seated in neatly organized rows behind barricades and shaded tents. Kids in plastic pilot helmets waved flags while vendors passed out souvenir programs and ice drinks. It was the biggest event of the season, featuring a rare flyover by the elite F-22 Raptor demo team. Cameras were ready. The announcer's voice rang crisply through loudspeakers. Honor guards lined the platform. Everything ran like clockwork except for one detail no one paid attention to. Near the eastern edge of the tarmac, beyond the designated seating zone and just before the restricted line, sat a man no one recognized. He had arrived early, walking without assistance, though his legs moved slowly. He carried a small folding chair, an old canvas bag, and wore a faded blue windbreaker with a weathered U.S. Air Force patch sewn onto the chest. His shoes were polished but old, his hands were steady, his face unreadable. When he reached the gate, he asked a volunteer where the veterans section was. She looked down at her clipboard, scanned his lanyard, and told him politely those rows were reserved for pre-registered guests. Without protest, he nodded, stepped aside, and made his way quietly toward the far fence. He didn't ask again. He unfolded his chair, placed it against the perimeter, and sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap for nearly an hour. He didn't move, just watched. He didn't film, didn't speak, didn't react to the jets overhead. He simply sat still, eyes tracing the sky like he'd memorized it. Decades ago, to some he might have looked like a retired mechanic, or maybe just an enthusiast who'd seen too many shows. A few of the staff noticed him, but no one stopped. No one asked his name except for a 12-year-old boy. The kid wandered from his father's side, walked along the barricade, then paused right in front of the old man. "Were you in the Air Force?" he asked, loud enough to turn a few heads. The man smiled faintly. "A long time ago," he said. The boy tilted his head. "Did you fly jets?" The old man's eyes returned to the sky. "No, I watched them leave and waited for them to come back." Before the boy could ask anything more, his father called him back, apologizing with a quick smile. The moment passed, but someone else had seen it on the main stage. Seated behind the operations tent, Captain Hayes, one of the junior officers assigned to coordinate the ceremony, caught a glimpse of the interaction through binoculars. He didn't think much of it at first, just a sweet exchange, but something about the old man's posture, the way he sat unmoving, the angle of his cap, the glint of metal at his collar, it pulled at something buried in the back of Hayes's mind. He lowered the binoculars. He couldn't place it yet, but something about that man didn't match the silence around him. Captain Hayes wasn't one to get distracted. He had a checklist as long as his arm, and briefing in 45 minutes, not to mention 3 separate teams depending on his coordination for the F-22 flyover. But something about the man by the fence pulled at him, something small and familiar he couldn't quite explain. Between tasks, he glanced back toward the east end of the tarmac. The man hadn't moved, still in that chair, legs crossed at the ankle, hands folded calmly, eyes fixed on the sky. Hayes told himself it was nothing, just an older man who liked air shows. They saw them all the time. But then he remembered the patch, not the large Air Force One on the jacket that was easy to dismiss, but the smaller pin below it, a dull, nearly colorless badge tucked behind the front seam. Hayes stepped into the ops tent, found a moment between radio calls, and zoomed in on one of the security cameras facing the east perimeter. The resolution wasn't great, but it was just enough. He enhanced the image, froze it. Combat controller insignia. Very few people wore it anymore. Few were still from the era that uniform came from. He clicked to another frame, the badge on the windbreaker's shoulder, a barely visible ghost of the original U.S. Air Force Strategic Air Command emblem nearly worn flat into the fabric. Hayes felt his chest tighten. That command had been disbanded decades ago. He grabbed his personal tablet and quickly searched the public archive of veterans affiliated with SACE. Cross-referenced by error, he scrolled past names until one stopped him cold. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur M. Lorne, Combat Controller, Strategic Air Command, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, declared missing for 6 days after a covert nighttime extraction under heavy fire. Later awarded the Air Force Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor for saving the entire crew of a downed Phantom under enemy fire with 0 air support. The final line of the record. Redeclined public ceremonies, never gave interviews, retired quietly in 1982. Hayes looked up from the screen slowly, then turned to face the runway. Again, the man hadn't moved. Meanwhile, the crowd was growing. Loudspeakers played marching band. Medley officers circulated with schedules and families took selfies against the backdrop of static aircraft. It was festive, casual. No one noticed that a man who'd once pulled bodies from a jungle firefight now sat 5 feet away from the flight line without even a folding tent above his head. Back at the east fence, another child had approached the old man, this time a teenage girl, maybe 14. She knelt down beside his chair and asked softly if he'd ever flown one of the big planes. The old man chuckled. "I never flew anything," he said, "but I once ran into one falling from the sky." Her father took a quick photo from a distance. The girl stood up, thanked him, and returned to the crowd. The old man remained seated back straight, watching the sky like he was waiting for a sign that hadn't come in years. Hayes moved to the communications desk and spoke quietly to one of the protocol officers. "I want you to get me visual confirmation on the man sitting at the eastern fence line. Don't approach him, just get a second set of eyes." "Sir, he's not on the list." "I know," Hayes said, "that's why I'm asking." The officer nodded and headed out. Back in the flight prep zone, the F-22 team was going through their final briefing. Call signs, timing, altitude, formation, lock-in, radio codes. Everything was routine until the team leader, Captain Morgan, caught sight of Hayes walking past with a strange expression on his face. "You look like you saw a ghost," Morgan said. Hayes hesitated, then pulled out his tablet and showed him the record. Morgan read in silence. "No way, he said that guy's here." Hayes nodded slowly. "If that's him, he shouldn't be watching this from the fence." Morgan looked out toward the flight line. "What do you want us to do?" Hayes didn't answer right away. He just looked back at the empty chair beneath the flag and the man who hadn't moved once in nearly 2 hours. Then he said quietly, "If you feel it's right, you'll know." The crowd rose as the announcer's voice thundered across the airfield. "Ladies and gentlemen, please turn your eyes to the sky. The United States Air Force F-22 Raptor demonstration team is ready for launch." A wave of applause spread across the viewing area. Kids climbed onto their parents' shoulders. Camera phones rose in unison to ground crew. Vehicles cleared the runway. A familiar whine echoed through the open sky as the aircraft engines roared to life. Captain Morgan climbed into the cockpit of Raptor 1, his flight suit zipped, helmet visor down, hands calm on the controls. He heard the click of final clearance overcomes across the field. Hayes watched from the edge of the staging tent, arms crossed, eyes locked not on the jets but on the old man still sitting in the same position, back straight, legs crossed, hands folded, still waiting. The lead aircraft accelerated down the strip, then another imperfect sequence for Raptors stir into the sky like a single thought, rising vertical before flattening out in tight diamond formation. The sound shattered the field and the crowd exploded in cheers. The pilot's bank rolled and carved through the sky in perfect precision, each pass tighter than last, thunder breaking with every to move. But then something happened as the jets lined up for the final formation pass, preparing for the signature 4-point peel. Raptor 1 deviated from the protocol, a subtle move at first, a few degrees of angle as it exited the loop, then a shift in altitude not noted in the flight path from the control tent. Hayes leaned forward. "Is he breaking formation?" There was no radio chatter, no error called, and the other jets held pat. In Raptor 1 dipped low at bang left, peeled wide, then turned on a direct, heading toward the eastern perimeter of the field. People began to notice, not alarmed but confused. The pilot was flying solo, lower than planned, coming in tight to the crowd, but not over the center, not toward the announcers' platform, not toward the main seating. He was heading straight for the fence line, straight for the old man in the chair. The announcer's voice faltered. Folks, you're witnessing a slight adjustment from the demo team. Don't be alarmed. Remain clear of the front rail." But the crowd had already turned the cameras pointed east. Now phones caught the jet approaching from a diagonal angle, then flattening in altitude until the aircraft passed directly overhead, just 50 feet above the fence. It was silent as it came, no afterburner, no roar, just the slow, wide, reverent pass of an F-22 wings, tilted nose, slightly dipped, a maneuver that wasn't in the playbook. Below, the man in the chair didn't flinch. He simply raised his hand and placed it on his heart. The Raptor passed with quiet grace, continued into the distance, then climbed sharply and disappeared into the sun. The other jets completed the routine without variation, returning to formation and finishing the display with textbook perfection. But it didn't matter because the crowd had seen something that couldn't be choreographed, a moment that wasn't written into the schedule. The pilot never said a word, no one called for it, but every person watching understood, and in that instant the man at the fence was no longer invisible. A junior officer near the bleachers removed his cover, then another. Within seconds, the honor guard on the field turned to face the east line. They stood at attention, silent, still. Hayes moved to the center line, chest-tight, voice low. "We'll need to mark this flight in the log." The protocol officer looked up. "What should I label the deviation?" Hayes didn't blink. "Recognition pass for a ghost." The jet had long disappeared beyond the tree-line, but no one moved. The crowd, the officers, the cadets, even the announcer stood in that suspended moment, between spectacle and silence, as if unsure whether they had witnessed something planned or something sacred. Near the fence, the old man remained. Exactly where he had been. He hadn't looked around, hadn't turned to acknowledge the hundreds now facing him. He simply sat with one hand resting lightly over his heart, the other gripping the armrest of his chair. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his hand, exhaled through his nose, and began to fold his chair. No one approached him. He stood up with quiet effort, legs stiff but balanced, and collapsed the canvas seat with practiced precision. He clipped it to his small pack, swung it over his shoulder, and began walking, not fast, not theatrical, just steady, like a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to explain. The crowd parted as he moved. Cadet stepped aside instinctively. A young airman saluted without thinking, his hand shaking slightly. The old man didn't return the gesture, not out of disrespect, but because some salutes carry weight when left unanswered. As he passed Captain Hayes near the operations tent, their eyes met. Hayes stood at attention, chest high, but didn't speak. The man paused only for a moment, then, with a small nod, he kept walking. No one followed him, no one called out his name, and in that silence the respect deepened. He reached the outer edge of the tarmac, where a single base bus waited for end-of-day rotations. The driver opened the door, puzzled to see a civilian so far out. The man climbed aboard, sat near the back, and looked out the window. He didn't wave, he didn't smile, but the moment the bus pulled away, someone in the crowd began to clap, not loud, not forced, just one person, then another, then a ripple through the entire field, not for the flyover, not for the show, but for the man who never asked to be honored and had finally been seen back on the flight line. The Raptor pilots stepped out of their cockpits, removed their helmets, and looked toward the road. Captain Morgan, it said nothing, but as he passed the control tent, he reached into his flight vest and pulled out a small item, an old mission patch, worn, weathered. He handed it to Hayes. "He flew with my father," Morgan said. "Saved his entire squad. No one ever told that story." Hayes looked at the patch in his hand and knew exactly what to do with it. He never returned the following year. His name was never officially added to the guest list. The flight records showed an unlogged deviation, unscheduled solo pass. Pilot discretion. No one filed a complaint, no one questioned it, but something changed at Fairford every Memorial Day, since one folding chair is placed at the far eastern edge of the tarmac near the fence line, not in the VIP section, not under a tent, just there in the open facing the sky. A flag is draped over the seat, a single patch rests on top of it, combat controller insignia below it, a handwritten sign, "Reserved the ones who never asked." Cadets I told the story without names. New pilots pass it down like folklore. Some call it myth, some know better, and every year when the Raptors take flight, they adjust their heading just slightly so that one pass crosses low over that chair. No announcer explains it, no formation is broken, but if you know where to look, you'll see the nose dip gently. The wings level the path, straighten for one brief moment, and if you blink, you'll miss it, just like he wanted. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone like him? Someone who never asked for recognition, who said little but carried more than most could? Imagine if you have. Write their name in the comments below. Let this space become more than a video. Let it be a place where memory lives and silence is respected. And if you believe these stories deserve to be heard, hit the subscribe button to support the channel, because some legends don't need medals.